think they have every ability and every license to go make it 1-2, and that's outside of our team goals and our offensive goals. That's definitely our goals in unit, is that those two are battling it out, to be the Mackey Award winner.
All right, hello, everybody. Welcome in on this Wednesday, Michigan Football Today, Maize and Blue Review. That right there was Michigan tight end coach Grant Newsome talking about tight ends, two good ones, Eric All and Luke Schoonmaker. And we're ready to talk a little Michigan football, as you might guess, on Michigan Football Today here on the Maize and Blue Review. And we're pleased to have Austin Meek from The Athletic joining us live on the line. You can see him if you're watching the show right now. Austin, what's going on? Thanks for joining us.
Hey, man, I'm good. Just, we're in the middle of the grind of preseason camp. It's that time of year where it feels like everybody's ready for game day to be here, but it's getting close, just a couple weeks away.
Yeah, I guess we're 2 weeks in, so I guess we can say we're halfway through officially, if there is such a thing. Now, I've noticed like the coaches, they've been sprinkling them in, the assistants. Grant Newsome, you just heard from, he was out there yesterday, and so I remember last year there was a common theme, whether you were talking to the players or the coaches, and it was that there was energy. Well, the energy, I just can't imagine the energy with the assistants, and I was kind of shrugging my shoulders at that, but they kept saying it, and then they credited the energy even after the Ohio State game, even heading into the college football playoff. I wonder, you listen to these coaches every other day or so down in Ann Arbor for the last 2 weeks. Is there any theme that jumps out to you when you're listening to these guys?
Well, I think definitely on the defensive side, the theme has been Michigan really embracing this idea of a no-star defense. A defense that is going to thrive on the strength of all 11 players rather than a couple players who are really going to be dominant players for that defense. And I think we're obviously going to see how that plays out on the field. The guys that Michigan lost, whether it was Aiden Hutchinson, Dax Hill, David Ajabo, those were some really good players who are going to be playing on Sundays. And that's not an easy thing to do, to replace players who meant that much to your program. But really, the theme that has emerged through these first couple of weeks of camp is the idea that Michigan may not have on the defensive side the same star power that they had a year ago, but there's some confidence that they have the depth and that they have leaders at every level of that defense to be able to carry on what they started last year.
We're going to ask the people when we're done here about their biggest worry with Michigan football. And I was reading in the mailbag of your colleague today, Stuart Mandel, and the question was, what about Michigan going 11-0 into the Ohio State game? And Mandel was like balked at the question. He's like, I'll fly up and get a corned beef sandwich, fly it down there to Texas. But he said his biggest worry went to the defensive side. And he mentioned those players, but he talked about the replacement of Jesse Minter for Mike McDonald, and it sounded like that was his biggest worry when it comes down to Michigan. Of course, the Wolverines have lost both coordinators. How do you look at that? When I listened to Minter talk last week or something, I thought, wow, that's Mike McDonald 2.0.
Yeah, and that's what everybody says, is those two guys are eerily similar. I asked DJ Turner that at Big Ten Media Days, that he kind of laughed at just how similar those two guys are. Obviously, we'll find out if they're similar from a play calling standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, in terms of the results. Look, Mike McDonald did a good job with that defense. He did a really good job. If it was easy to just walk into a new situation as a defensive coordinator and have a turnaround like that, then we wouldn't have the turnover we have in the coordinator ranks in college football. Not everybody can do what Mike McDonald did with that defense last year. And so we're going to find out if Jesse Minter is up for the task, if he's going to just pick up right where Mike McDonald left off, or if it's going to be a tough transition. We're going to figure that out. But I think clearly Michigan is trying to have continuity. That was the goal, was to really be able to have it be a smooth transition without a big scheme change or a lot of new terminology. And that's what we've heard so far, is that there's been a lot of similarities from what they were doing last year to what they're doing right now with Jesse Minter.
Yeah, and we know it's the head man. People always, the head coach, people always point to Alabama. Like Nick Saban loses his coordinators every year. And there's one Nick Saban. Jim Harbaugh's pretty good, but there's no other coach that people point to that loses coordinators all the time. And like, oh, they're fine because they lose them all the time. So if you are putting together a list of worries or, concerns, if you don't want to be worried about that, having both of those coordinators and having two new guys in there would be a concern. We have a question coming in from the feedback. Antoine calling you Mr. Meek. He said, well, what kind of football mind does Matt Weiss have? Who does he copy his offensive philosophy from? What is his style if he knows? And if he doesn't know, what is his best guess? There's a couple questions there from Antoine. Matt Weiss, what kind of football mind do you detect from the co-offensive coordinator?
Well, he's a Harbaugh guy. He worked for Jim Harbaugh at Stanford. He worked for John Harbaugh for, I think, 12 years in Baltimore. And then he came to work for Jim Harbaugh. So he basically spent his whole career with the Harbaugh coaching tree. So he's going to have a lot of the same ideas and core philosophies as Jim Harbaugh does when it comes to how to run an offense. And I think that's probably the reason that he's in the position that he's in right now. Those two really, I think, have a really similar philosophy and are on the same page in terms of a lot of the things they want to do offensively. I think Matt Weiss was a big part of the ideas that we saw come in last year, things that the Ravens had done that Michigan tried to incorporate in terms of their running game. Some of the stuff they did with their offensive line last year, I think, was influenced by some of the things that Matt Weiss did with John Harbaugh in Baltimore. So I expect this to be a continuation of what Michigan did last year offensively, just to another degree. I think we're going to see Michigan build on a lot of the things that they did last year and a lot of the things that worked for Michigan last year in terms of building their offense around the running game and then incorporating the strengths of the quarterback, whether that's Cade McNamara as a guy who takes care of the ball or J.J. McCarthy is a guy who can run around a little more and throw the ball down the field.
Yeah, I don't know if I struggle with it, but there's the idea where you want to have your identity, and that was Michigan's identity, was whether you want to call it ground and pound or running the football, old school or whatever else. But you also look at this particular roster, including the running backs, who are pretty good catching the ball out of the backfield, and you say if they're going to play to their strengths, they're going to be throwing the football a whole heck of a lot more, including those tight ends that we heard Grant Newsome talk about at the beginning. And you add Ronnie Bell, and it looks like some pretty incredible freshmen that are coming in. It's like they're almost going to have to throw it more. I ask you that, and then thinking about Weiss when he was with Baltimore, he also was there for 2018 when Lamar Jackson had his MVP season. You wonder if he's thinking about J.J. McCarthy, if there's anything, as J.J. does have some wheels and running the ball. And then, Alex Orji, who we saw in the spring game. I don't know if it's short yardage situations or just to mix things up or anything else. I mean, are all those things you think on the table and the possibility that, that Weiss is ready to unleash something in the running game that way?
Well, yeah, they're going to have to do things a little bit differently because last year Hassan Haskins was such a huge part of that offense. I mean, he really was the bread and butter of that offense when they needed 5 yards or, in short yard situations or whatever. It was going to be Hassan Haskins. And so they're going to have to figure out now how to replace that. And they're going to have to do it in different ways. So could it be more of the quarterback running game with J.J. McCarthy or Alex Orji? I think it could be that. Could it be more guys getting involved in the passing game? I think it could be that. They've got this receiver group, which Jim Harbaugh says could be the best that he's had at Michigan. There's legitimately 7, 8, 9 guys in that room that you'd say could contribute. So when you talk about that, and then the two tight ends, Eric All and Luke Schoonmaker, Donovan Edwards is going to catch the ball out of the backfield. That's a lot of guys who need to touch the football. And so I think that Matt Weiss and Sharon Moore are going to have to get kind of creative, figuring out how to put the ball in the hands of their best players and spread the ball around.
I would think that every Michigan football fan out there watching and listening probably already follows Austin Meek on Twitter, but I put his profile up on the screen anyways, by Austin Meek, for those for whatever reason they didn't think of it. And of course, Austin doing a great job covering Michigan for The Athletic. I'm going to put a picture up on the screen. I read a feature that you had on Mazi Smith this week, and it was great. Fantastic. A bunch of stuff that I didn't know about Mazi Smith, and this played off of Smith being named number 1 on the Feldman's freak list, which was pretty awesome. But I'm looking at his avatar, speaking of Twitter, of Mazi Smith, and that, while looks a little bit like Mazi, is actually not Mazi. Austin, who am I looking at?
So that's actually his grandfather, Carl Smith, who had a very interesting life. Was a civil rights activist, pioneer in the community in Grand Rapids. Actually has a mural in downtown Grand Rapids, which I want to see the next time I'm in town. Was involved with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights during his career, and a lot of other community organizing organizations. So, part of, I think, where Mazi comes from, his family background came from his grandfather, even though his grandfather died when Mazi was pretty young. Had a chance to talk with Mazi's mom and his aunt, who both shared a little bit of the family history and just some of the things that Mazi may have taken from his grandfather that you can kind of see coming through now in the position that he's in, as a guy who really seems to be finding his voice as a leader on this defense. Jim Harbaugh says, he's the kind of guy where you just want to hear what he has to say. Like he's got this kind of thoughtful, sort of laid back demeanor. But there's some kind of sneaky wisdom in there. He has an interesting way of saying things and thinking about things, an interesting perspective, I think. And I think you're starting to see that now filter through to the rest of the team, because he's a senior, like you said, number 1 on that freaks list, a guy who started to really become well known, around the Big Ten and around the country. And it really feels like this is his time now to really step into that leadership role. Fabulous
feature. I enjoyed it on The Athletic. Well, I know Mandel's not watching this show, certainly not watching it live. Maybe he'll pick it up and watch a replay when he sees that, you're on it talking about Michigan football. But he really sounded shocked, that the idea that Michigan could go 11-0 and take on Ohio State. He said, hey, if Michigan's in and they're still alive for the division, that would be a nice accomplishment. So, I don't want to say it's a backhanded compliment. I like 11-0 is a pretty special season. How do you think Michigan's going to do this year? Would you be completely shocked if they're run the table and getting ready for that game against Ohio State with no losses when they go down to Columbus this year, which is on November the 25th?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that schedule, I've been saying, there's not that many games you look at and say, are games that are going to be really challenging for Michigan. There's a handful of them. Going to Iowa is going to be really difficult. Michigan State has been a hard matchup for Michigan. Penn State is never an easy game.
No.
But the non-conference schedule, Michigan does not need to be at their best from day one by any means. They've got some time to, whatever questions they don't answer in preseason camp, they basically got 3 weeks to figure those out. And then they're going to go to Iowa in week 5, and we'll figure out where they're at. But, would I be stunned if Michigan is 11-0 going into Ohio State? I wouldn't be stunned. I've seen crazier things happen. To me, the expectation, and I've said this, several times, is I think 10 wins is the bar for this team. I think if Michigan wins 10 games this season, then I at least will feel like, that was that they built on what they did last year. With this schedule, I feel like 10 wins are right there. If this team comes together the way they're capable of. If it's less than 10 wins, then I think you say, hey, it's a missed opportunity. With as much as Michigan has coming back and the schedule that they have, I think if they're fewer than 10 wins this year, I'll feel like that was a missed opportunity. But I think the pathway is there for Michigan to be in contention for the division and for the college football playoff on that last Saturday of the regular season. And then you go to Columbus and see what happens.
Austin and Meek, excellent assessment. We appreciate your time so much. We enjoy your work at The Athletic and continued success there. And before long, you'll be up there in the press box, and we'll all be watching it happen, and you'll be reporting on it up there. Thanks for your time, man. We'll talk with you again.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right. See you, Austin. There he is. Austin Meek from The Athletic joining us. And I was just sitting back. There was in that last question. It's weird how football works. We like it so much. I think all of us would want to be playing football. And if we're not playing football, we'd like to be at the game. If we're not at the game, we want to be watching the game. These things all seem like pretty straightforward. But if we're not all of those things, we like talking about the game and listening to people talk about the game and talk about Michigan football. And I caught myself there at the end listening to Austin talk about Michigan and the schedule and what 10 wins, how he put it, like that bar, being able to get there. First, that would be 2 losses. You might want to not entertain that if you're a Michigan football fan. Like, this is the thing. Like, it's there was a time when that was pretty routine, actually, from 1969. I don't know. I wasn't recalling things early in the 70s, but from late in the 70s all the way up to 2007, it was always like, hey, Michigan, they're probably only going to lose a game or two, and maybe they'll find a way to not lose any of them. And then there was a dip, but it feels like it's back, at least that way. And that's what a Big Ten championship will do. Now, I asked the question at the start, and this is where I want you to answer it. I've got a couple concerns or worries myself, and it's the question for you out there if you're watching, and we'll put it up on the screen and we'll address the worries. What worries you the most about this year's Michigan football team? That is the question that I have for you. Let's go to the feedback, and let's start out with, I'm trying to push the button and it's not working. Let's see. There it is. Now it is working. Antoine has no worries. If he wants to come up with one, is that Michigan fails to utilize all its weapons adequately. But he must admit Michigan has been less conservative in terms of play calling. Yeah. It's part of it when you sit around thinking about the offense. If Michigan, can they utilize Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards? Like, can they utilize both of these backs? They both can catch the ball out of the backfield. They're both pretty dynamic. Edwards is, thinking about a dynamic playmaker. I think of Blake Corum. Was it the first series in the second half against Ohio State? Between the tackles where he, went for like a 45-yard run. I think about him making that run against Nebraska where Michigan's offense just outscored the Cornhuskers, even though the defense had, given up 29 points in that second half against Nebraska. The offense just kept putting their foot on the gas and did not allow Nebraska to come back in. That's just utilizing the backs. If they could utilize both tight ends, 4 or 5 wide receivers, it's something, man. Weiss at the controls, just being able to divvy up the passes, when to run, getting them all involved, all of that. That would be, could it be a concern? I'm not that concerned about the offense myself. I'll get some more of your concerns. Let's put up a concern. I mentioned Stuart Mandel from The Athletic. I was reading his mailbag today, and the question, and he answered it. It was a question about Michigan being able to go 11-0 heading into the Ohio State game, which I have predicted that they will do. And Mandel said he is going to fly up to Ann Arbor and pick up a corned beef sandwich and then fly him down to Texas if that happens. He does not think that that's happening. He is worried about the losses on the defense of Hutchinson, Ajabo, Hill, and McDonald. Now, we talk so much about Michigan, and they're going to do it with an no-star defense. And, Jesse Minter is Mike McDonald 2.0. But I think if you're saying, is this a legitimate worry about Michigan this year? Their defense and the star power and the production in terms of sacks, 25 between Hutchinson and Ajabo, almost that many more when you're talking about tackles for loss with Hutchinson and Ajabo. That's an incredible number when you put sacks and TFLs together with these guys. They were game wreckers. They were playmakers, and Hill, the chess piece that he was, where you could line him up in the slot, put him out in the corner, running him around as the last line of defense. First round pick from Cincinnati. I think this is a legitimate worry. And then with McDonald, McDonald was good. He wasn't great in the Ohio State game, and Minter is cut from the same cloth. But when you're saying you even if you're Alabama, are you just talking about, we'll just replace the number 2 overall pick? You're not just replacing the number 2 overall pick, but Michigan has about 4 or 5 rush linebackers, defensive ends that can pick up the slack. And it didn't worry me, but when I hear coaches, and which coach did I hear talk about scheming? It was Minter talking about TFLs and sacks, and saying we'll just scheme it up. Whenever I hear coaches talk about scheming it up, that's always like, we don't have the horses, so we're going to have to scheme it up. Just a little bit, but I think that is a legitimate worry. Now, as I say, it's a legitimate worry. The first prediction I made in the offseason for Michigan was to go 10-2. I thought it was very reasonable. I looked at the schedule. I said, all right, down at Ohio State, probably a loss. And also at Iowa, a place that they haven't won at since, I think, the 80s. And you remember just a couple of years ago, 2016, when they were 8-9-0 and went down there and lost that particular game. And you know how it is when they play at night at Kinnick. So, I thought 10-2, very reasonable selection. But the more that I looked at that game against Iowa, and the more that I just took that dive into Iowa Hawkeye football, I'm not all that impressed with Iowa. I don't think Iowa is going to be a contender in the West. I think Iowa got lucky that Sean Clifford got hurt last year, or they would have lost that game at home. I also think it's not luck, but being able to get 25 turnovers and all those interceptions like they did for the defense, that was great. But those are not the kind of things that you can count on. And they lose 3/4 of their secondary. They got a good one coming back, but you lose 3 of those guys, and that was big in that turnovers. Then you look over the offense, it's like the worst offense in the Big Ten. So Michigan, and I know that Iowa in 2016, they were 3-4 loss team. So, right, I'm not saying that they're just going to walk in there, but I think that Michigan's going to win that game. And if they win that one, then, why not? Now, here's another legitimate concern, and one that I had not put too much. It did not keep me up at night. It didn't worry me at all. But then I saw Dave Revson from the Big Ten Network, and they're in Ann Arbor right now, stop 12 for BTN. So we'll expect to see some video and some interviews from the coaches, from those guys and everything. But Revson, when he was with it was DiNardo, is his colleague that goes around on these trips to the Big Ten. They were pumping up Maryland, talking about just how good Loxley and Tagovailoa. And I had to recall last year, I picked Michigan to lose 3 games last year. I picked them to lose at Penn State, against Ohio State, and I picked them to lose at Maryland because of Tagovailoa and because of Loxley and the way that he recruited. I thought, that looks like that could be the nightmare game for Michigan. That would have been a terrible finish. Michigan, I predicted them to go undefeated and then lose their last 3 games. I was wrong. They won all those games. The point is that when I watched Michigan play Maryland and go in there and just, smack them upside the head, and Tagovailoa, he's a gunslinger, but, Michigan's picking him off. Their defense couldn't stop him. And now I'm expecting Maryland to come in and be good for Michigan. Well, that's what DiNardo was very impressed. And now this morning in Stuart Mandel's mailbag, he's impressed as well. And this is what Mandel said today. He could see Tagovailoa and the Maryland offense giving U of M problems in week 4. Said he'd call it a big success if Michigan goes into the Ohio State week with its division title hope still intact. So there's somebody else saying, watch out for Maryland and Michigan. So if they still are alive in the Big Ten East, that means they've but they're going to drop a game or possibly two. So I guess they would do it against somebody in the West. Is what we're looking at from Mandel. That would be at Iowa, right? So there you go, or Nebraska. Those are the two crossover games that we're talking about, right? I guess I can't really see them. I suppose they could lose to a Penn State and then still hope that they have their division titles in division title hopes still intact. But as my worry meter goes, am I worried about Maryland in week 4? And now that I have some people saying, look out. And I saw somebody else saying, that's a real trap game because everybody's talking about the soft non-conference schedule and Michigan going undefeated in September and it's a cakewalk and the season doesn't start. And I've been saying this myself until October 1st, but Maryland, the Big Ten opener on September the 24th for the Wolverines. Should I stop saying that the season starts October 1st and that September is a complete cakewalk? I'm going to still say it. Dangerous, I know, but I'm just not there with Maryland. I don't think Tagovailoa is going to come in and, throw it all over the big house. I just don't think that's going to happen. All right, let's see what worries the people. Adrian, worry. Lack of depth with linebackers. Ooh. Well, Adrian, Junior Colson, Nakai Hill-Green. Nakai Hill-Green been a little bit banged up over the first 2 weeks. So you've heard that I've heard Jimmy Rolder, the true freshman, and then Deuce Spurlock have both been thrust into a position where, they might have to get out there, and you got Hood and McLaren as linebackers for Michigan as well. That's a lot of guys that I just mentioned there that have not seen significant time when you're talking about depth at linebacker. Joey Velasquez, the two sports star, I would put him in. Khalil Mullings, the two-way running back linebacker, put him in the mix as well. He played a little bit. So he's had a little bit, but I think Adrian, that is a very good concern or worry about Michigan, their lack of depth at linebacker. He also thinks about worries, goes to the quarterback. So I can see that. Let's get some more worries in here. Blue Dove. It's always nice to see him on the feedback. What's up, Blue Dove, PDX? What I hope to hear is that Cade and JJ are getting equal snaps and JJ is getting snaps with the first team guys. I think so far you're hoping to hear it. That's what's happening. So you'll be happy about that, Blue Dove. That is what's happening. Ferris has some people have Michigan going 9-3. I can't see it. Yeah. It's amazing what a nice year like last year will do. If you start talking yourself through the schedule and you approach it like this, it's very difficult to go undefeated. It doesn't really happen. And with Michigan, it's happened once in 70 years, something like that, 75 years. So to expect Michigan to go undefeated, like, what are we talking about? Anybody predict that? You hope and everything else that you have a once. I don't even know that's a generation. Once in a millennial. Decades. 75 years to put it, specifically. So then you start talking about, beating Ohio State, which they haven't done in 21 years. 2 decades, back to back, or at Ohio State. So, that game is daunting. And then just going up to go 11-0, history will tell you that if you look back, okay, some of those 70s teams, run up against Ohio State, but you're probably going to trip up somewhere, is what you tell yourself, even though you really like this kid, probably at Iowa. That is a concerning game, especially at night. And you say this is different. Well, it hasn't been different for this Michigan team in Iowa City. It's just the way it goes. I mean, that's the one thing about college football. You can say, well, you know, this is different. The game has really changed. Blah. And Michigan never wins in Iowa. They don't play there every year, but they have a hard time. So do other teams. Have a hard time going on the road and playing at night at Iowa. So you just think, you know, okay, and then sure. And especially if it was before last year, they'll probably trip up to, you know, Penn State or Michigan State. But I think when I think about the kind of team that they have talent-wise, and then I just look at how the schedule sets up for them, I don't know if it's perfect. Is the schedule perfect? It's perfect if you don't want to lose any non-conference games. It's perfect. It's perfect if you don't want to play any tough road games, really, until you get to Ohio State. I mean, you can't play them all at home. You have to play some road games at Iowa. Hey, if you want to go to the college football playoff, you got to go down to Iowa City, and even if it's at night, you got to win the game. So they should win that. Which gets me to another worry, and this one, whether you think it's legitimate or not, this also, as I was thinking about worrying, this one crossed my mind. Worry spots for Michigan. The Michigan State game on October 29th. Now, if you are a Michigan fan, immediately when you see this, you laugh. Because you are not worried at all about Michigan State. Michigan will kill Michigan State. Michigan, you know, like whatever you say. It's the Spartans. It's the, you know, there's no way. And I think 99% of the fan base feels just like you do when it comes to Michigan State. They never give Michigan State, even when D'Antonio won like 8 out of 10 or whatever they have won right now. It's like, there's all kinds of reasons for for this, but the reason that I'm not as worried, because if I look at the recent success that Michigan State has had against Michigan, and if I look at Mel Tucker's success, he's 2-0. If I look at Jim Harbaugh's overall record, is under 500 against Michigan State. I know they had the snap game and the rain game and the pandemic game. You know, these are easily chalked up to, you know, Michigan should have won those games, or, you know, that's what they're going to need. Well, they get that kind of stuff. But the reason I'm optimistic about Michigan this year against Michigan State, in some years I'm not. I'm more optimistic this year, not just because this game is at home, which makes me optimistic, even though State recently has had some success here against Harbaugh at the Big House. I know State fans point to that a lot, and I would do the same thing if for some reason I was a State fan. Michigan is taking Michigan State, and they're putting them up with Ohio State as they're concerned. They're giving Michigan State respect. They are worried themselves. They're circling this game. They're putting a countdown clock somewhere. They are reminding everybody that they are keeping this game top of mind. Now, fans never keep the, you know, you might keep the game top of mind, but you never give Michigan State any credit. You laugh at Michigan State, you call them names, and this is what you do in a rivalry. I get that, but it's also trickled over to the actual, if you know any Michigan football players that, you know, that played for the Wolverines, they act the same way as the fans. Cracking jokes, don't give Michigan State respect, always have some kind of excuse. And it affects the current team. And there's a lot of people, when I say that, you know, Michigan should give Michigan State more respect, that they laugh at me and say, "You kidding me? Those things don't matter." They don't matter so much that Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'll point to, because you wouldn't think that you would need to get any extra oomph because Michigan State sits around thinking about the disrespect from Michigan all year long, and they're chewing gunpowder, and they come in, they're so hyped up. People say that stuff doesn't matter. Amon-Ra St. Brown from the Lions, wherever he was picked in the NFL draft, the 16 wide receivers that was picked before him, he knows all of them. He can go right through. Yep, this guy in the third round, this guy in the fourth round. He knows them all. Why? Because he feels disrespected, and it motivates him. I've never played in the NFL or in college, but it's funny what elite athletes do to just get that little extra motivation. Tom Brady, is the greatest player ever, and he gets motivated by some of the well, they're disrespecting me. Draymond Green, who just got married last week, he knows all 30 players that were picked in the first round before him the year he was drafted. He can go right through them. And he uses it. So, Michigan, the whole point to that long rant was that Michigan this year is not disrespecting Michigan State. When I heard Jim Harbaugh and the list of goals, it would have been a very easy thing, and Michigan fans would have loved it if Harbaugh would have been up there. Our goals: beat Ohio State, win the Big Ten, and win the national championship. Everybody, no mention of Michigan State. Be like, ha ha, you don't get a mention, Michigan State. Michigan fans would have loved that. Jim Harbaugh did not do that. He mentioned Michigan State. When you hear the Michigan players talking about their goals this year, they mention Michigan State. I think that's smart. So I'm not as worried as I usually am or in previous seasons about Michigan State. Mark worries. He sees this year's defense having a similar looks and even being just a little bit better, more athletic in the secondary. That doesn't sound like he is worried. Adrian, is it just him or Corum getting more run than Hassan Haskins before the injury? Well, it was a pretty even split. I think it's a good point, Adrian, that, when everybody talks about Hassan Haskins scored, he set a Michigan record for rushing touchdowns, tied the Michigan record for rushing touchdowns. No, broke the record for Michigan rushing touchdowns, and just had an incredible year. But what is lost in that is if you go back to each game, the 56 carries against Washington in game 2, both of them, it was really a shared backfield all the way. You go through there. I'm looking against Northwestern. Corum had 19 carries for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns. Haskins, 23 carries, 110 and 2. That's divvying up the carries between those two guys. And then what happened against Michigan State is Corum got hurt. And instead of continuing some kind of rotation and shared responsibility with the backfield, they just said, hey, Hassan, here's a saddle. We're going to put it on you, and we're going to ride you the rest of the way, and that's what they did. And Hassan Haskins answered all the way through. And I know that, look at against Indiana, 27 carries, 168 yards. 31 carries at Penn State for 156 yards. 5 touchdowns against Ohio State. He responded. Hassan Haskins did. But you are right, Adrian. It was not just you. It was an even backfield. You forget about that. More concerns. Bill is not concerned about Khalil Mullings being bigger and faster than Haskins. Well, Bill, one thing about Haskins, and he was a linebacker, true enough. Coming out of high school, the knock on him, his 40 times, that's why he, 2-star, 3-star, whatever he was not a 4 or 5-star, that's for sure. That he just didn't have the speed. He looked pretty fast running on the sideline against Ohio State. Pretty good football speed. But if you recall, it wasn't like Haskins had his coming out party last year. It was the year so, and it wasn't the year before. That was the pandemic. It was the Notre Dame game where it was raining, cats and dogs. That was a night game. The night game against Notre Dame, that's where Haskins, and maybe you just thought he was a good mutter, like he could just run in the 6 inches of rain. He was awesome. It took him a little time. And I'm skeptical about if he was moving over there full time, and he did look like he had a nice little burst in the spring game. So maybe he could make the transition, but Harbaugh's playing in both ways, which I've talked about how I don't really like. And, there it is. Concerns, not a lot of concerns other than the linebacker. I'm looking. Antoine's got one more concern, and that is Penn State. But they're coming into the big house. The captain. Is this a concern? Did 2018 feel like a success? Disagree that 10-2 is a success? Well, I think it's a bar. The problem when you lose the last game of the year against Ohio State, it never feels like a success. If you're a Michigan fan, the Michigan could go 11-0. And if they lose to Ohio State, it's not going to feel like a success. Right, Captain? And if they go 11-0 and lose to Ohio State and then lose to the bowl game, it's going to feel like, you're back to the whatever with Jim Harbaugh. And meanwhile, 11-0 is great. But if you lose to Ohio State, you gotta fight tooth and nail with Ohio State. It's got to come right down to it. It's hard. It's hard to call the season a success when you lose to Ohio State. I've said it 4 times. But you're right, Captain. That's the way the end of that season went. Was that the 62-point game? Yeah. All right. The punters, I'm asking for concerns, and people are just asking me questions, which is fine. I'll go through some of these, asking touchstone games. Do I agree that 10 wins is a successful season? Well, it covers the over in Vegas. I agree that if Michigan beats Ohio State and goes, no, you gotta go to the Big Ten championship game. College football, can you go to the Big Ten championship game and lose that and it'd be a success? They gotta beat Ohio State. So even if Michigan goes 11-0 and loses to Ohio State, I don't feel like it's a success. Now, if they lose a game along the way and beat Ohio State and get to the Big Ten championship game, these things get tricky, and I get lulled into them every year, just like you do. Like last year, I was sitting around screaming and yelling about how Michigan, there's no way that they can lose to Michigan State. It is a must-win game for Jim Harbaugh. If Jim Harbaugh does not beat Michigan State, then it's just time to go ahead and move on. He'll have a like that's what I was saying. That was it. And then we know what happened. So, much as I say that about Ohio State, if Michigan somehow loses to them, but is still able then to get into the college football playoff, so there's little things like that. But I think that Michigan has the kind of talent, and the program is in the spot where you got to win the Big Ten, and you got to beat Ohio State. And you got to beat Michigan State. And if you don't do those things, or if you're not doing 2 out of those 3, then it's not going to feel like a success. So that's what I'm thinking about. All right. Let's see. We'll take a couple more questions on the feedback. Kevin is asking about wouldn't we want to have Ohio State win against Notre Dame so Michigan can beat an Ohio team that could very likely be undefeated? Yes, you're exactly right. And it is hard to say. And yes, if you're a Michigan fan, you want Ohio State to beat Notre Dame. But I've been down this road many times. We can say it. We can know that it's right. And yet you can be over there rooting for Notre Dame, and that's just the way it goes because it's very difficult to root for Ohio State. So, yeah, you can say it. It's what actually needs to happen. That's what's best for Michigan, and yet, go Irish. Oh, it's weird. Venice is worried about the Nebraska game. Yeah, they get a new quarterback. Scott Frost has been close, but no cigar in a million games. Once, one of these times he's going to get over. Be a program win for, for Frost. He really needs that. They had Michigan in a tough spot last year. Iowa has a good defense. Here we go. Let's see. Here's somebody with a worry. Ty is the offensive play caller. Who will it be? Yeah, I think it's going to be Matt Weiss. That's what I think it is going to be. Now, they keep talking about it being a collaboration with Sharon Moore, and I think that in the offensive meetings all week long, it is a collaboration. They're like, what are we going to come out and how many we're going to script 8 plays. Sharon, what do we want to do? We want to hit him with his counter. We want AJ Henning on the end around. Do we want to put Henning in the backfield? Do we want to get the ball in Ronnie Bell's hands immediately with a little smoke screen? Do we want to take a shot deep to Cornelius Johnson? Like, they come up with their plays and they're going through all of them. And I think that's good to have a collaboration. Everybody can be in on it. But what you can't do is when you have the headset on, you can't have Sharon Moore and Matt Weiss talking to Cade Cunningham and saying, all right, we're going ZY banana here, Cade. And Sharon comes in and said, okay, I got next play. I'll be calling next play. No, you're not doing that. One of the guys has to be the play caller. It's going to be Matt Weiss. Can Sharon say, hey, I really like this play coming up next? I don't know how much unless you're asking for it. What I think happens is that you have the game plan, you have all of the plays, all of the plays that Sharon Moore wants to run. What he thinks is going to be effective, and then you just have to dial it up. And it's one thing about this collaboration is that, and I don't play video games, but even people that play video games will tell you, you got to get a feel, as the offensive coordinator, if you're handing the controller over to somebody else, maybe it's got nothing to do with playing video games. But what it does feel to me like as a play caller is that you need to get into a rhythm. You need to have your own philosophy in the game and how you're going to do things, and you're not calling plays in a vacuum, and you're setting things up and you're taking all this in, and it's a feel. And so having a bunch of, trying to let somebody else, it's a little bit like playing quarterback. That's why I don't like rotating quarterbacks. You got to be allowed to make the calls and send them in. You can't have this series and then Sharon's going to take the second series, or, you're going to let Sharon call the fourth quarter, if it gets out of hand. I don't like any of that. So the play caller, I believe, will be Matt Weiss, or I would think that would be a mistake by Jim Harbaugh. Oh. Is that a mistake by Jim Harbaugh? It seems like it. It would be if they actually did something like that. All right. Mark echoes what Adrian was saying about linebacker play. Loves Junior Colson. But the depth at linebacker. Remember the linebackers last year? Did it start against Michigan State? Or did Wisconsin, I think, even had some success? Running backs coming out of the backfield, the linebackers getting beat on some wheel routes or routes down the sideline by running backs. I know Michigan is aware of that. They've worked on it. I don't know if that means it's just something, talent-wise or scheme-wise with Michigan, but yeah, that was something that is worrisome. But that they've had to work about it. Everybody is a little bit concerned about the linebacker depth as now we talk about it. Theodore is a little bit concerned at depth at linebacker. Junior Colson has to stay healthy. John Stoops has a worry. It is about the depth. And they get to practice against that's huge. The depth on defense. Well, this is a little bit this is the break that Michigan gets this year and next year. But really this year, considering, where their Big Ten games are being played and how it sets up. Michigan has all of September to play all of their freshmen. Remember, the freshmen get to play 4 games, and they can still redshirt. The job for Michigan's offense is to go out and drop a hammer immediately, run up that score, and then the job for Jim Harbaugh and both of his coordinators is to empty the bench and everybody gets in. Not just against Colorado State and Hawaii, but against UConn. Everybody's playing. It's a luxury that Michigan has to be able to put all of this depth in. So that's where it's at. The Punters has a worry about the secondary. The biggest loss from last year's roster was Dax. The group has talent, but will have an increased load this year. I can tell you, we haven't seen really Makari Page and RJ Moten in big-time games and big-time spots or being counted on. They've played. They've, even started some games. Rod Moore is the most proven guy there, but that's – and then you get Zeke Berry and Keam Sabb that's getting talked about a lot. I feel pretty good about the safeties, and I feel really good about the corners. I think people are underestimating or forgetting about Jaimon Green, who was Michigan's best corner for most of the season until DJ Turner came on and really had a fantastic second half of the season. But, Will Johnson keeps getting talked about for good reason. That's a pretty good – they got good corners, good experience at corner, good depth at corner, and they've got good talent. And I don't know, they don't have quite the experience at safety, but man, I like the safeties. I agree with I think the linebackers and then, the defensive ends, or you want to say the rush linebackers, a lot of different guys there, but they're going to be counted on to make the plays this year. Mike Morris and Taylor Upshaw, are they ready to get in there and get into the backfield and come up with TFLs and get to the quarterback? Are they able to get home? Ken Harrell, who was so fabulous against the run last year and played a lot, I mean, he looks like he would be able to get after the quarterback, leak in there, and look like he could be like Devin Bush getting after the – but he wasn't asked to do that because they would bring him out, and Ajabo was so good at it. Harrell could be that guy. They've got a lot of guys. The questions with defense are legitimate. And so I would say so too are worries about the defense. Chad is worried about losing to Maryland or Nebraska when those teams shouldn't even be in the game. Ty is not worried about any player position. He's worried about a first-time play caller on offense and who it will be. Now, there he is again. I think he said that before, Matt Weiss. We went over that. So those are the concerns, I believe. It's hard to go through all of them. Sorry. Let's see. Otis has got a concern. Let's see what his concern is. He's worried. He's not worried about any game with the disrespect Michigan is getting. They'll stay fired up through and to the college football playoff. Now, I don't detect disrespect from Michigan. I mean, are you saying it's from the media that they're number 8 in the country? That one dude, I don't remember his name. I would be giving him attention that he so much desires, and he did it on purpose to get that attention. There's some college football, I don't know, member of the media who in the spring had Michigan, in his top 10, but then dropped him out of the top 25. And then, he was like going through all of the reasons. So that guy is disrespecting Michigan. There are probably a bunch of Michigan State fans that are disrespecting Michigan. I don't know if anybody else is disrespecting Michigan. Get me off the screen. I'm sorry, Bill. Sorry, man. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Let's see what else. Somebody wants to know about camp news. Join the Mazi Blue Review. I saw Josh Henschke had another report last night on practice. Let's see if I can remember off the top of my head. I should have taken some notes about what he had to say about practice. What was he talking about? Was he talking about the linebackers? Was he talking about how they liked Spurlock and Rolder? I think so. I forget which practice. I may have already talked about that. So I forget, sometimes where I'm at. Okay. No more concerns. No concerns. I'm getting to the end here. I don't know. This when you get to the end here, it's kind of like we're talking about winning the NFC North and getting a bye. MSU will be tough. There we go. I mean, it is here at the end. Here's a couple. The Russian bot. It's not a day until you get the Russian bot, but it's good to see Yakov in here talking about winning 11 regular season games every year. It's a difficult task. What it has done for me is it's given me the question for tomorrow or Friday, and it's something to chew on. What represents a successful season to you, Michigan fans? Because we had Austin Meek, who said that 10-2 would be a nice benchmark, for this particular team. It's over the number in Las Vegas, for whatever that means. Every time I talk with my friend in Vegas, and I was talking to him this week, we were just talking. And so we were talking about Michigan. I said, I used the over and underline about, there would be over. And he's like, they don't use that as a gauge. It's purely to get money on. Okay. So maybe I shouldn't use it. That it would be over in Vegas. He didn't like it. He didn't think I should be using it. He thought that was something that the media and the fans get caught up into. I don't know. That maybe that's just a Vegas and a gambling thing. When people are really into gambling in Vegas, they really don't want to get into, saying, hey, it's a big deal if you cover the number. It's a big deal if it's just a, let me start that over. It's a successful season for you if you put $100 on Michigan to go over 9.5. And they go 10-2. Success, but it might not mean success overall. So we'll explore that coming up this week. Tomorrow, we've got a special. Jim Scarcelli joins us on Thursday, and we finally have. Sometimes this happens wherever you're at in your job. You really find something where your niche, whatever else. Scar has telestrator capabilities now. He has asked me since the first time he came on. I was like, hey, I want to draw up some plays. I want to watch some videos, and I want to get onto the telestrator and tell everybody what's happening. He's like, Joel Klatt missed this during the game. I want to top, and he's drawing everything. And I said, Scar, we'll get it by the time the season opens. And then last week, Scar said, I bought a telestrator, and we said, well, let's put it on. Let's see if it works. And so it did work. And Scar started drawing X's and arrows and talking about, okay, let it run, and having the play and why it worked and who got caught up in the wash and all this stuff. And he will be diagramming. He's going to take a half dozen plays tomorrow, and he will diagram plays. And I'm excited about it. I think that's all I want to do is watch Jim Scarcelli diagram plays and talk about what's happening down there with the play, that for us, the untrained eye on what they're really calling, what they're looking to happen, how it's unfolding. So if you've watched Jim Scarcelli before, you kind of know, you can get an idea and like, oh yeah, he'll be good at that. But if you've never watched Scarcelli, you got to tune in tomorrow and check it out, because he is going to go through a half dozen plays from last year. I'm not sure exactly which ones yet, but we'll find those out tomorrow. Great to see Paul, as always, on Clubhouse. He's talking about Twitter Spaces. Maybe that's next, huh? Maybe that's next. Maybe some Twitter Spaces as I do this. Can I do Twitter Spaces and Clubhouse at the same time? It sounds like my voice is going. So with that, See most of you all at 5. What's that mean? Okay. I don't know. I'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Until then, everybody have a great rest of their day. And thanks for watching. Reminder, we're live weekdays at 1 o'clock talking about the latest in Michigan sports. Till tomorrow, a great day.